Joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman Angie Craig of Minnesota. She's a candidate in the Democratic primary for Senate in Minnesota. Congresswoman Craig, good to have you back on the show. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be with you.
Talk to me, make your case about why you believe you are the strongest candidate for this open Senate seat in Minnesota.
Well, I'm filled with such gratitude to the people of Minnesota. I'm running for the U.S. Senate because I want to stand up for working families in this country. I grew up in a mobile home park, and at my core, I'm still the kid from the trailer park. And as I traveled the state, as I've listened to folks talk about the cost of their health care, of housing, of childcare, of grocery cost, I know that I have the experience to fight for Minnesotans on day one in the United States Senate. I also know that I am the candidate best positioned on day one to stand up to Donald Trump and this administration. I took a seat here in Minnesota that had been in Republican hands for 3/4 of a century, Ali, and there is no way the Republican on the other side of me is going to beat me in this Senate race.
Let's talk about, you appeared on my show week after week after week at the height of ICE's activities in Minnesota. You literally saw some of the worst of it. You were at those detention centers. If you're a United States Senator, what more or else will you do to rein in ICE and its behavior across the country?
Yeah, the people of Minnesota have been so resilient during this period of time. I stood in front of the Whipple Detention Center in front of semi-automatic weapons pointed right at me and my colleagues. As a U.S. Senator, I'll continue to do what I've done in the U.S. House. I'll absolutely not provide any funding to Trump's immigration system. Stand up and dismantle Trump's ICE. Make sure that before we give them another dime, that they pass reforms that have them govern just like any other law enforcement agency in this country. And more than that, Ali, though, we have to fight Trump now, but it is time for comprehensive immigration reform in this country. It is time for our nation's dreamers and DACA recipients to stop having to wait for a path to citizenship. It's time for families to stop waiting to have that path to legal status, who've been here and obeyed the laws and paid their taxes. It is past time. And as a U.S. Senator representing the great state of Minnesota, I know firsthand what they are capable of, and it has made me more motivated than ever to pass comprehensive immigration reform in our country.
You have criticized your opponent, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, about her ties to the fraud investigation that's going on in Minnesota. She says your biggest weakness was your vote in favor of the Lincoln Riley Act, which passed the House on January 7th, 2025. Before Donald Trump returned to office. Donald Trump later signed it into law in his second week back. That expanded ICE's rights to detain and deport non-citizens who are charged with crimes. You've since said that you regret that vote. And as I said, you've been on my show many times talking about ICE. What made you change your mind there, and how much of a vulnerability is that in a state that has probably had more direct interaction with ICE than any other?
Well, I will say that any vote to give Trump's immigration authority in this Congress was a vote that I regret, and I do regret it. But if we look at Operation Metro Surge, they were not following any law, including that law. They were targeting my Black and brown neighbors. They were arresting people who had absolutely committed no criminal offenses. So, the Lieutenant Governor, I have criticized her over the fraud issues, but I've criticized her because she hasn't taken accountability for the fraud issues. In fact, she's passed all of the blame over to Governor Walz. And I am someone who deeply believes in being honest with the people that I represent. I've taken the accountability from my side, and I've simply made the point that the Lieutenant Governor hasn't taken the accountability, and Republicans are dying to run against the Lieutenant Governor because they believe she has a unique vulnerability on the fraud issues in Minnesota, and they plan to use it against her in the election.
As I was saying to her, this has been a tough campaign. I think tough campaigns are probably healthy. Not as bruising as Michigan, but pretty bruising. One of the issues there has been outside money, corporate money. Most of the corporate money and outside spending that has gone into this campaign has gone toward you. It used to be a sign of a good thing. Now it's a bit of an albatross. How do you address this?
Well, I do think, again, we should ban outside money completely. I am a co-sponsor of a constitutional amendment that would overturn Citizens United. I think transparency for this outside money would be something as a U.S. Senator that I would strongly fight for. I think there are a lot of outside groups who are playing in this Minnesota race because they believe that I am the strongest candidate to beat Michelle Tafoya, who is likely to be the nominee for Republicans, and take Minnesota off the Senate map. We have to hold this Senate seat in Minnesota if we have any chance of taking back the U.S. Senate. And the honest truth is, the only way we stop Donald Trump and Republicans is by winning elections and taking majorities.
So I just want to try and square that, because I think there are a lot of people who express this view that we like to get the money out of politics, but for the moment, while there's money in politics, I'll take it.
Well, I can promise you that Republicans are coming with tens of millions of dollars. And I don't think Democrats can tie our hands behind our back to compete against Republicans. It's a little bit like, Ali, the conversation around gerrymandering. I am a strong supporter of banning gerrymandering across this country, but that needs to be for blue states and red states. And banning outside money, it needs to be for Democrats and Republicans. Folks, we have chaos and crisis on our hands. We have to be able to compete in these competitive elections if we want to win and if we want to take majorities back.
You've got a slightly different perspective on Israel-Gaza than Peggy Flanagan does, but you are receiving support from AIPAC. Can you tell me a bit about that?
I have not been endorsed by AIPAC in my Senate run. I have not received any PAC support from them. And look, I mean, I do believe that we are at a moment in time where we have to strongly consider what our relationship is with the state of Israel. I think the best way to reset this relationship would be for Benjamin Netanyahu to lose his election this fall. And I do believe we have to reassess our support for the military in Israel. And I look forward as a U.S. Senator to having that conversation. I certainly support a two-state solution where Palestinians and Israelis can live in peace and security.
Let me ask you about, and I asked Peggy Flanagan about this, and I had asked Abdul El-Sayed about it and Mallory McMorrow about it. We can make a lot about these fights that go on during primaries, but you've got less than 3 months to win an election. One of you is going to win this primary tomorrow night, and we'll be covering it very closely. Will you endorse Peggy Flanagan if she's the victor? She told me she would endorse you.
I will be on the night the election is called, or the morning. I will endorse Peggy Flanagan right away. I will support the lieutenant governor. Look, at the end of the day, she and I agree on so much more than we disagree on. I have the experience to stand up to the Trump administration on day one. I've already voted to impeach Donald Trump twice, and I'd be happy to do it again.